The late afternoon sun was slowly dipping behind the trees when Claire's car started making strange noises on the quiet road. At first, she thought it was nothing serious, just the engine heating up after a long drive. But soon, the sound grew louder, and the car began to shake. Before she could pull over properly, the engine gave out a rough cough and the vehicle came to a stop. The silence that followed made her realize how alone she was. The road stretched out in both directions with barely a car in sight. Birds chirped somewhere far away, but otherwise, it was just her broken car, and the long, empty road. Claire sat there for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She wasn't used to being in situations like this. She lived most of her life in the city, where help was only a call away. But now, in this small town she had recently moved into, things were different. She looked at her phone, but the signal bar was weak. Calling for a tow truck would take hours. She sighed and stepped out of the car, brushing her hair from her face as the warm air hit her. A few minutes passed. Just when she was beginning to wonder how she would handle the situation, she heard the sound of another engine approaching. She turned quickly and saw a pickup truck rolling toward her. The truck slowed down, and a tall man in a faded work shirt stepped out. He had strong hands, a calm face, and the kind of presence that made her feel both safe and slightly nervous at the same time. His clothes had dark stains of grease, and his boots were worn from years of work. He looked like someone who spent his life fixing things. "Car trouble?" he asked in a steady, deep voice. "Yes," Claire replied, trying not to sound too relieved. "It just stopped on me. I have no idea what happened." The man gave a small nod and walked toward her car. He didn't rush, but his movements carried confidence, the way of someone who had done this 100 times before. He introduced himself simply as Marcus. She watched as he leaned over the hood, asking her to pop it open. With quick, practiced hands, he began checking the engine. His fingers moved like they belonged there, tightening a cable here, tapping lightly there, listening to the sounds of the machine. Claire stood a few feet away, watching him work. She couldn't help but notice how focused he was, as if nothing else existed when he was around an engine. The sweat on his forehead, the concentration in his eyes, the way his hands knew exactly what to do, it all fascinated her. She tried to distract herself by pretending to check her phone again, but in truth, she kept stealing glances at him. Within minutes, Marcus stepped back. "Your alternator's acting up," he said. "It's not completely gone yet, but it's weak. That's why your car shut down. I can get it running for now, but you'll need to bring it into a shop soon before it gets worse." Claire nodded quickly, pretending to be surprised by his explanation. "Oh, thank you so much. I wouldn't even know where to start with something like that." Marcus gave a small smile, though it was more polite than warm. "That's what I do. Been fixing cars since I was a teenager." He went back to work, tightening a few parts and making some adjustments. After a little while, he asked her to try starting the car. She slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. To her relief, the engine roared back to life. She looked up at him with gratitude. "You're a lifesaver," she said, stepping out of the car again. "Just doing my job," Marcus replied, wiping his hands on a rag he pulled from his pocket. But what Marcus didn't know was that this moment had not been as accidental as it seemed. Claire had already heard about him before. Ever since moving into town, she had caught whispers from locals about a quiet mechanic who was always willing to help people, never asking for more than a fair price. Some said he was too kind for his own good. Others said he preferred keeping to himself, living a simple life without fuss. For some reason, those stories had stayed in her mind. She found herself wanting to know more about him. So when she realized her car was due for service, she made a decision. Instead of taking it to the dealership in the next city, she drove around near Marcus's workshop, waiting for the right moment. Today, when her car sputtered in a way she had half expected, she let it break down near the road where she knew he often drove by after finishing work. And just as she had hoped, he appeared. Marcus, of course, had no idea of any of this. To him, she was just another person in need of help. He had seen many stranded drivers over the years, and he treated her situation the same way. He had no reason to suspect that she had been thinking about him long before today. Claire thanked him again, her smile brighter this time. "Do you have a shop in town? Maybe I can bring the car there for a proper check." "Yes," he answered. "Marcus Auto Repair, near the old train station. It's nothing fancy, but it gets the job done." "I'll come by," she promised, even though she already knew where it was. Marcus gave a small nod and began walking back to his truck. He wasn't a man of many words, she noticed. He seemed content keeping conversations short. But that didn't discourage her. If anything, it made her more curious. As he drove away, Claire stood by her car for a while, thinking. The plan she had started was working, though she hadn't expected to feel this strange mix of nervousness and excitement. She wanted to know Marcus, not just as a mechanic, but as a person. She wanted to understand what made him so different from others she had known. And she was willing to take her time, little by little, until he let her in. That night, when she returned home, she couldn't stop replaying the moment in her head: how calm he had been, how easily he had fixed what seemed impossible to her, how humble he had acted. To Marcus, it had been nothing special. But to her, it was the beginning of something important. She knew that the next step was to go to his workshop. And when she did, she wouldn't just be another customer. She would be the woman who wanted to know the man behind the grease-stained shirt and quiet smile. The story had only just begun, though Marcus didn't realize it yet. For him, today was just another roadside rescue. For Claire, it was the first chapter of a plan she had carefully thought through. And as she went to sleep that night, she smiled, knowing that tomorrow she would find another reason to see him again. The next morning, Claire woke up earlier than usual. She sat on the edge of her bed, thinking about the man she had met the day before. Marcus's calm voice and steady hands replayed in her memory like a film she couldn't stop watching. She told herself it was just respect for his kindness, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. She had been curious about him for weeks before even meeting him, and now that she had spoken to him, the curiosity was stronger. She wanted to see him again, and she already had the perfect reason: her car still needed to be properly checked. After breakfast, she drove into town and headed toward the old train station, just as Marcus had told her. His workshop wasn't hard to find. It was a modest building with peeling paint, a large open garage door, and a simple sign that read, "Marcus Auto Repair." She parked outside and looked at it for a moment. It wasn't flashy or polished like the big city repair shops she was used to. But it felt different. It felt genuine. The kind of place built not for show, but for honest work. Claire stepped inside, and the smell of oil, rubber, and metal instantly filled the air. The sound of clinking tools echoed as Marcus worked on a car. He was bent over the engine, his shirt slightly damp from sweat, his focus so deep he didn't even notice her at first. She watched him quietly, noticing how natural he looked in this place. Every tool seemed to have its space, and even the mess had an order to it. Finally, Marcus looked up and spotted her. He straightened slightly, wiping his hands on a rag. "You made it," he said, his tone simple, as if her presence was expected. "I said I would," Claire replied with a small smile. "The car is still giving me some trouble. I thought it would be better if you gave it a proper check." Marcus nodded and gestured toward her car. "Pull it inside. I'll take a look." She did as he said, and soon he was back under the hood, examining the same spots he had worked on yesterday. This time, however, she stayed closer, asking him questions. "So, how long have you been doing this? You seem to know cars better than anyone I've ever met." "Most of my life," Marcus answered without looking up. "Started when I was a kid. My father used to fix old cars in our backyard. I just picked it up from him." Claire leaned against the wall, listening intently. "That's impressive. You must really love it." He paused for a moment before replying, "It's work. It puts food on the table." His answer was short, but Claire noticed something in his eyes when he said it. There was a spark, even if he tried to hide it. She realized he wasn't the type to talk openly about his passions, but they were there. She just needed time to draw them out. For the next hour, Marcus worked while Claire watched. Sometimes he explained what he was doing in simple terms, sometimes he stayed quiet, lost in his own rhythm. But the more she listened, the more she realized how skilled he really was. He didn't just fix machines, he understood them, almost like they spoke a language only he could hear. When he finally closed the hood, he gave her a look that was both professional and firm. "You'll need a new alternator soon. I've adjusted it for now, but it won't last long. I can order the part and replace it for you." "That would be great," Claire said, her voice bright with gratitude. "I'd rather you handle it than anyone else." Marcus gave a small nod. "It'll take a few days for the part to arrive." "Then I guess I'll be seeing you again soon," she replied softly, letting her words hang in the air. He didn't react much, but she noticed the slight curve of his lips, almost a smile. Over the next few days, Claire found herself visiting the workshop more often. Sometimes she came under the excuse of checking on the part, other times she brought small things like coffee or sandwiches, saying she thought he could use a break. Marcus always accepted politely, though at first, he seemed cautious. He wasn't used to people hanging around. Most customers came, got their car fixed, and left. But Claire stayed, asking questions, telling little stories about her life, and filling the quiet workshop with warmth. At first, Marcus thought she was just being friendly. He told himself not to think too much about it. But as time went on, he realized he was beginning to look forward to her visits. Her laughter softened the heavy silence of his shop. Her curiosity made him talk about things he hadn't shared in years. He found himself telling her about his younger days, how he once dreamed of owning a bigger shop, maybe even designing cars of his own. It surprised him how easily he spoke around her, when usually he kept his thoughts locked inside. Claire, on the other hand, was careful not to push too hard. She didn't want him to feel suspicious. She had planned to get close to him, yes, but she also wanted it to feel natural. She admired his strength and humility, and the more she saw him, the less it felt like a plan and more like something real. She began to notice small things: how he always cleaned his tools after every job, how he never overcharged his customers, how he treated even the smallest task with respect. One afternoon, as the sun set behind the workshop, Marcus finished repairing a customer's car. Claire sat nearby, sipping coffee. "You really care about this place, don't you?" she asked. Marcus shrugged. "It's my life. This shop, these cars, it's all I've got." Claire tilted her head, studying him. "That's not true. You've got more than that. You've got talent. You've got kindness. Not everyone works with so much honesty." Her words caught him off guard. He wasn't used to compliments, especially ones that went beyond his work. He looked at her for a moment, then quickly turned back to his tools. But deep inside, her words left a mark. By the end of the week, the part for her car arrived. Marcus replaced the alternator and made sure everything was perfect. When he handed her the keys, he simply said, "You're good to go now." Claire took the keys but didn't leave right away. Instead, she looked at him and said softly, "Thank you, Marcus. Not just for fixing my car, but for being who you are. For a second, Marcus didn't know what to say. He felt something shift inside him, though he couldn't name it yet. To him, he was just doing his job. To her, it meant much more. That night, as Marcus locked up the workshop, he found himself thinking about her. He told himself it was nothing, that she was just a kind woman who appreciated his work. But a part of him, a part he rarely listened to, wondered why she kept coming back. He didn't know the answer, but he knew he didn't mind. In fact, he realized he wanted to see her again. For Claire, everything was unfolding just as she had hoped. She had managed to step into his world, slowly breaking down his walls. And though Marcus remained unaware of her plan, she could already feel the bond forming. What began with the car breaking down on the side of the road was now becoming something neither of them could ignore. The days began to blend together, and soon Marcus realized that Claire's presence had become a natural part of his routine. At first, he had thought of her as just another customer, someone whose car needed fixing. But now, she came around even when her car didn't have problems. Sometimes she brought lunch, sometimes she just sat and talked while he worked, and other times she simply watched him in silence, as though she found comfort in his quiet company. Marcus wasn't the type to let people into his life easily. He had learned long ago that keeping to himself was the safest way to live. But something about Claire was different. She had a way of asking questions that weren't too heavy, of laughing at the little things, of making even the silence between them feel less lonely. He noticed how her eyes lit up when she listened, how she leaned forward as if every word he spoke mattered. It was unusual for him, but he found himself enjoying it. One Friday afternoon, Claire showed up carrying 2 paper bags. "I thought you might not have eaten," she said, placing them on the workbench. Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't refuse. Inside was fried chicken, biscuits, and sweet tea from a diner down the road. "You didn't have to do this," Marcus said, wiping his hands before sitting across from her. "I know," Claire replied with a small smile. "But I wanted to. Besides, it's no fun eating alone." For a while, they ate together, the sound of tools replaced by the sound of casual conversation. Claire asked him about his childhood, and though he usually avoided talking about the past, something about her presence made him open up. He told her about growing up in a small house with 3 siblings, about how his father taught him to work hard, and how his mother always said he had mechanic hands. He spoke about the first car he ever fixed, an old truck that barely ran, and how proud he felt when he managed to make it drive again. Claire listened closely, smiling at his every word. "It sounds like you've always been destined for this," she said softly. Marcus gave a small shrug. "Maybe. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. That's enough for me." But Claire could hear something in his voice, something he didn't want to admit. A part of him longed for more, though he had buried it under years of routine. She decided not to push him, not yet. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and asked, "Do you ever dream about doing something bigger with your skills? Like maybe opening a larger shop or teaching others?" Marcus looked at her for a moment before shaking his head. "Dreams don't pay bills. This shop does. That's all I need." Claire didn't argue. She knew better than to challenge him directly. But deep inside, she admired his humility even more. He wasn't chasing wealth or fame. He just wanted to live honestly. And that, to her, was rare. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. Marcus began noticing little things about her too. He noticed how she always dressed neatly, but never in a way that showed off. He noticed how she treated everyone with respect, from the diner waitress to the man sweeping the street. He noticed the way she laughed, a light, musical sound that seemed to brighten the entire workshop. Without realizing it, he began waiting for her laughter, missing it on the days she didn't stop by. One rainy evening, Claire dropped by the workshop again. Marcus was finishing up repairs on a customer's car when the storm outside grew louder, the rain beating heavily against the roof. Claire sat nearby, watching him work, her chin resting on her palm. "Doesn't it ever get lonely here?" she asked suddenly. Marcus paused, tightening a bolt before answering. "Sometimes. But I'm used to it. Cars don't talk back, but they don't lie either. They tell you exactly what's wrong if you know how to listen." Claire tilted her head thoughtfully. "And what about people? Do you listen to them the same way?" Marcus looked at her, his dark eyes steady. "People are harder. They don't always say what they mean." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "That's true. But sometimes, if you spend enough time with them, you can see what they're not saying." Their eyes held each other's for a moment longer than usual. Something unspoken passed between them, something that neither of them had the courage to name yet. From that day, Marcus started noticing how much his life was changing. He still worked hard, still kept his shop running, but now his days weren't just filled with engines and tools. They were filled with conversations, with laughter, with the soft presence of someone who cared enough to stay. Claire had become part of his world without him even realizing it. Meanwhile, Claire was aware of exactly what she was doing. She had planned to get close to Marcus from the start, but now her plan didn't feel like a scheme anymore. It felt real. The admiration she once pretended to show was now genuine. She found herself thinking about him when she wasn't around, wondering if he had eaten, if he was tired, if he was working too hard. The more she learned about him, the more she respected him. One afternoon, she brought a photo album with her. As Marcus looked confused, she opened it and showed him pictures of her family, her old life in the city, the reason she had moved to the small town. She spoke honestly about her struggles, about how she had grown tired of people who only cared about money and appearances. She wanted something real, something simple. "And then I heard about you," she added quietly. "People in town kept mentioning this mechanic who helped everyone without asking for much. I thought, maybe I should meet him. Maybe he's the kind of person I've been searching for." Marcus was quiet, his hands resting on the table. He didn't know what to say. Compliments always made him uncomfortable, but the sincerity in her voice made it harder to dismiss. He looked at her, trying to read her expression, but all he saw was honesty. That night, after she left, Marcus stayed in the workshop longer than usual. He thought about everything she had said, everything she had done. He tried to convince himself that she was just being kind, but a part of him, deep down, knew that she meant every word. He wasn't used to being noticed like this. Most people only saw him as the mechanic, the man who fixed cars and nothing more. But Claire saw him differently. She saw the person behind the work. And while Marcus didn't want to admit it, he realized something important: he wanted her to keep seeing him that way. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between them grew unspoken but undeniable. Marcus still carried himself with the same calm, quiet strength, but he found himself opening up more when Claire was around. He found himself talking about his dreams, his worries, even his regrets. And Claire, in return, gave him her full attention, making him feel like his words mattered. Little by little, the walls Marcus had built around himself began to lower. He didn't even notice it happening. But Claire did. And though she had planned this closeness from the start, now it was no longer just her plan, it was something real for both of them. The evening was quiet when Claire decided it was finally time to tell Marcus the truth. She had been carrying it inside her for weeks, watching him open up, listening to his stories, and feeling the bond between them grow stronger. What had started as a plan was now something real, and she didn't want to keep hiding it. Every time Marcus looked at her with those steady eyes, she felt a weight in her chest. He deserved to know how it all began. That day, she stopped by the workshop just as Marcus was closing. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky with orange and pink. The garage door was half shut, and Marcus was putting away his tools. He looked surprised when he saw her walking toward him, but he didn't say anything. He just gave a small nod, the way he always did when she appeared. "Do you have a minute?" she asked softly. Marcus glanced at the clock on the wall, then nodded again. "Sure. What's on your mind?" Claire hesitated. For a moment, she almost lost her courage. But then she remembered why she had come. She didn't want to build something with him on half-truths. So she took a deep breath and spoke. "There's something I haven't told you," she began. "Something important. And I think you should hear it from me." Marcus raised an eyebrow, curious. He leaned against the workbench, arms folded, waiting patiently. He was always calm, but this time she could sense the question in his eyes. She clasped her hands together nervously. "The day we first met, when my car broke down on the road, it wasn't exactly an accident." Marcus's expression didn't change right away, but she noticed the way his shoulders stiffened slightly. She continued quickly before he could interrupt. "I had heard about you before. People in town talked about you, about how you always helped others, about how you were different. And I wanted to meet you. I wanted to know who you were. So I waited for the chance. And when my car started giving trouble, I didn't stop it from happening. I knew you might be nearby. That's how I ended up on that road." The words hung in the air. For the first time since she had known him, Marcus's calm face shifted into something harder to read. He pushed himself away from the workbench and walked a few steps toward the garage door, as though he needed space to think. "So you planned it," he said quietly. His voice wasn't angry, but it carried weight. Claire nodded quickly. "Yes. I know it sounds strange, maybe even wrong, but please understand I wasn't trying to trick you in a bad way. I wanted to meet you. And once I did, everything became real. Everything I've said and done since then has been honest." Marcus stood there for a long moment, silent. The sound of the crickets outside filled the pause between them. Finally, he turned back to her, his eyes steady but unreadable. "Why me? You didn't even know me. Why go through all that just to meet a mechanic?" Claire stepped closer, her voice trembling slightly but filled with truth. "Because you're not just a mechanic, Marcus. From the first time I heard about you, I knew there was something different. People talked about your honesty, your kindness, the way you help without expecting anything. And when I finally met you, I saw it for myself. You're the kind of person I've been searching for, someone real, someone genuine." Her words softened his expression, but only slightly. He rubbed his chin, thinking. "You should have just walked into my shop. You didn't have to go through all that." Claire smiled faintly, though her eyes were serious. "I was afraid you wouldn't notice me. That you'd treat me like any other customer and nothing more. I wanted a chance to really know you, not just as a name on a receipt." Marcus let out a slow breath. He didn't know how to respond. Part of him felt unsettled, even a little betrayed. He had thought their meeting was chance, simple fate. Now he learned it was planned. But another part of him couldn't ignore the sincerity in her voice, the way she looked at him as if she truly saw him. Finally, he spoke. "I don't like games, Claire. My life is simple. I don't pretend, and I don't expect people around me to pretend either." "I know," she said softly. "And that's why I had to tell you the truth. Because I don't want this, whatever this is between us, to be built on something hidden." The garage fell into silence again. Marcus looked at her, studying her face, her eyes, her posture. He was searching for any sign of lies, but all he saw was honesty. She stood there with her heart exposed, waiting for him to either accept or reject her truth. After what felt like forever, Marcus finally moved. He walked back to the workbench, picked up the rag, and wiped his hands slowly, even though they weren't dirty. Then he looked back at her. I don't know what to think right now. I'm not used to people going out of their way for me. Most people just want their cars fixed and nothing else. Claire stepped closer again, her voice gentle. I'm not most people. I didn't want just a mechanic. I wanted to know the man behind the work. And now that I do, I don't regret any of it. For the first time, Marcus allowed a small smile to appear, though it was faint and uncertain. You're brave for saying all this. I'll give you that. I'm not brave, Claire said, shaking her head. I'm just honest. And I care about you, Marcus. More than I expected to. Those words lingered in his mind long after she left that night. He sat alone in the workshop, staring at the tools, the cars, the familiar world he had built around himself. It had always been simple, quiet, predictable. But now, Claire had walked into it with her laughter, her kindness, and her unexpected confession. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: his life wasn't the same anymore. When Marcus finally turned off the lights and stepped outside, the night felt different. He looked up at the stars and thought about her words. She had planned to meet him, yes, but everything after that had been real. And as much as he wanted to be cautious, he couldn't ignore the truth he felt deep inside: he didn't want her to disappear from his life. The next morning, when Claire returned to check on her car one last time, Marcus greeted her with a calm nod. There was no anger in his eyes, only thoughtfulness. He handed her the keys and said, "Your car's fine now. But if you ever want to stop by, you don't need an excuse." Claire's heart lifted at those words. She smiled, her eyes shining, and for the first time, Marcus let himself smile back fully. It wasn't just a polite smile, it was real, and it carried the promise of something new. The next few days felt different for Marcus. He still opened his workshop every morning, still worked on cars with the same careful hands, but something in his life had shifted. He caught himself looking at the door more often, half expecting Claire to walk in with her easy smile and thoughtful words. It surprised him how much he wanted her company, how much he had begun to enjoy the way she filled the silence of his shop with warmth. Claire, on the other hand, felt lighter after telling him the truth. She had worried that Marcus might shut her out completely, but instead, he had surprised her. He didn't turn her away. He listened, he thought, and in his quiet way, he let her know she was still welcome. That meant everything to her. She knew it would take time for him to fully trust her, but she was willing to wait. What mattered was that the door between them had not closed, it had only just opened. One afternoon, she decided to visit the workshop again, this time without any excuse. Her car was running perfectly fine, and she didn't bring any food or gifts. She just walked in, as he had told her she could. Marcus was bent over a car, the radio playing soft blues music in the background. When he looked up and saw her, there was no surprise in his face this time. Instead, there was a calm acceptance, as if her presence was already a part of his daily rhythm. "You came," he said simply. "I told you I would," she replied, smiling. For the next hour, she sat nearby, watching him work. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Occasionally, he explained what he was doing, and she asked questions, genuinely curious. At one point, she picked up a wrench and handed it to him when he needed it. He gave her a small nod of thanks, and for a brief moment, their hands brushed. Neither said anything, but both felt something stir quietly inside. As the weeks rolled by, their connection deepened. Marcus began sharing more about himself, things he had kept hidden for years. He spoke about the challenges of running a small shop alone, about the times when money was tight, and about how he had once thought of leaving town to start fresh somewhere else. Claire listened without judgment, encouraging him with gentle words. She told him he wasn't just surviving, he was building something important, something that mattered. In return, Claire opened up more about her own life. She spoke about why she had left the city, how she had grown tired of people who only cared about appearances, and how she had longed for something real. She admitted that sometimes she felt out of place in the small town, unsure if she truly belonged. Marcus listened quietly, his steady presence reassuring her more than words ever could. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat outside the workshop together. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple. Claire looked at Marcus, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "I'm glad I met you," she said. "Even if the way I went about it wasn't perfect, I don't regret a single thing." Marcus glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You caught me off guard," he admitted. "But I believe you now. I believe that what we have is real." Those simple words meant more to Claire than anything else. She felt her heart swell with relief and joy. For the first time, she knew that Marcus wasn't just tolerating her presence, he was welcoming it. From then on, their bond became stronger and more natural. They shared meals, laughter, and quiet moments together. Marcus even began to close the workshop earlier some evenings, something he had never done before, just so he could walk with her through town or sit with her on the porch of her small house. People in the community began to notice too. They saw the quiet mechanic who once kept to himself now walking side by side with the woman who had brought light into his life. One Saturday morning, Marcus surprised Claire by taking her to a nearby field where he kept an old car he had been working on for years. It was a classic model, rusty and worn, but with potential hidden beneath the dents and faded paint. "I always wanted to restore it," Marcus said, running his hand over the hood. "But I never had the time. Or maybe I never had the reason." Claire looked at him with shining eyes. "Maybe now you do." For the first time, Marcus laughed openly, a deep, genuine sound that made her heart flutter. He handed her a rag and said, "If you're going to hang around, you might as well learn how to get your hands dirty." Together, they worked on the car, side by side. Claire wasn't very skilled, but Marcus was patient, guiding her through small tasks, teaching her how to hold tools, how to listen to the engine. It became their project, a symbol of their growing bond. Every dent they smoothed, every bolt they tightened, felt like a piece of their story coming together. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened into something neither of them had expected. Marcus, once cautious and reserved, found himself opening up fully, allowing Claire into parts of his life he had kept hidden from everyone. And Claire, who had once come into his life with a secret plan, now stood beside him with honesty, her admiration turning into genuine love. One evening, after they finished another round of work on the old car, Marcus wiped his hands and looked at Claire. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a softness she hadn't seen before. "You know," he said, "when you first told me the truth, I didn't know if I could trust you. But now, I'm glad you came into my life, even the way you did. You changed things for me." Claire felt her eyes grow misty. She reached out and took his hand gently. "And you changed things for me too, Marcus. More than you'll ever know." They stood there in the fading light, their hands clasped, the old car behind them, and the future ahead. It wasn't a story of chance anymore. It was a story of choice, her choice to seek him out, and his choice to let her in. In the end, Marcus realized that sometimes life doesn't follow a simple path. Sometimes people enter your world in unexpected ways, bringing with them challenges, surprises, and truths you never saw coming. But if you open your heart, you might find that what begins with uncertainty can lead to something real, something lasting. For Claire and Marcus, that was exactly what happened. What started with a broken car on a lonely road became the beginning of a bond built on honesty, respect, and trust. and as they looked toward the future, they knew they were no longer walking separate roads. They were walking the same path together.